It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It is the Take Command podcast. Craig Hoffman, Logan Paulsen. It's late in the season, Logan. We're both battling. We're fighting through. So if the voices sound a little scraggly, we apologize, but we're gonna do our best to answer your mailbag questions today.
I was gonna say you actually sound pretty good.
You sound,
relatively speaking,
you sound like you're fighting. So
what's funny is I feel great though. Feel amazing.
See, I sound okay and don't feel great. So put us together and you have one really great human. You also, on the other side, have someone who's dead. All right, so let's get into it. You submitted your questions all kinds of ways. We had a couple that came through via email, thanks to HoffmanShow.com's contact page. We had a couple that came through on Instagram, at Hoffman.sports and at Logan_Paulsen82. And then we also had some that I put out the APB, if you will, on Blue Sky, and some folks chimed in there. So we're actually going to start with the one. There's a bunch of offseason questions, which I thought was interesting. It's like, hey, this team's in the thick of the playoff race, so what are they going to do after this season? We'll get there. But let's start off with the ones in season. And JVA asks, Wiley or Lucas? Very simple. This prompt for questions came pretty close after that Tennessee game where they ran like crazy with Cornelius Lucas in at right tackle. Now, Andrew Wiley, as we record this on Tuesday, he practiced on Monday and should be good to go this week. He is the starter, but would there be any, I want to say upside, would there be any merit to Cornelius Lucas actually staying at right tackle?
I don't personally think so. I think Lucas might be a better pass protector long term. I think he's just got the length, he's got the frame, he's got all the things you're looking for when you want when you're kind of looking for those pass protector guys. But in terms of how Wiley's played this year, I think he 100% deserves an opportunity to play more and has earned that starting opportunity. Now, is that for the foreseeable future? Is that for 5 years down the road? I don't know, but I will say for this year, when you look at him play, when you look at him battle, when you look at how he competes, when you look at how he finishes, like all those things are things that I think are super important. And really, I think part of what has made this offensive line so effective is not that they're the best athletes. It's like when you look at how Allegretti finishes, when you look at how Wiley finishes, when you look at how Cosme finishes, when you look at how Biadasz finishes, right? Those guys are grimy, nasty dudes that get down and dirty and finish the play to the whistle. And I think Wiley is a big piece of that identity. And so for me, again, Lucas has done a great job. Like he deserves all the credit in the world, but I think he has a role in that offensive line, which is to be the swing tackle. And when he comes in, he does a great job, which is exactly what we're looking for. But I think Wiley deserves a ton of credit, really.
Yeah, no, I think he does too. And I would just, for multiple reasons, I would stick with Andrew Wiley. The one you just said is kind of the football reason. And then there's kind of the locker room reason of, unless a dude is doing something ultra spectacular, right, you don't really let a guy lose his job to injury. And so Wiley hasn't done anything
That's a great point.
that merits his losing his job. And so, yes, Big Luke had a fantastic game. I think he played really well at left tackle too when he was rotating with Brandon Coleman. But at the end of the day, like Coleman's your future left tackle, Wiley's your starter, and upsetting the apple cart is not worth it because there's no real gigantic payoff there either way.
Right.
And so from the limitations too of what you can do from a mobility standpoint, some of your screen game, things like that. Once Wiley's back out there as the better athlete, I think it is definitely worth. It's a good question, but the answer is
it's a great question. I think also people are looking at it, and you can empathize with this, Craig. You see a performance like they had versus Tennessee, and you say, man, what was the difference there? And Lucas in for Wiley was one big difference. Obviously, I think just the shift in mindset is also a thing that needs to be pointed out. But I understand why people are asking it. But I do think, like, for the reason you said, for the reason I just said, I think Wiley deserves that opportunity to keep that job.
Yeah. The other big difference was Tennessee decided to line up with like 7 yards in between all their dudes, and it made blocking pretty easy. And Brian Robinson was back, so that tends to help
Weird move.
as well. Yeah. All right. As for speaking of the run game, but on the other side, got a couple of questions that I think are related. So I'm going to lump them together and give the shout outs to those who submitted them. Stephanie Lee responded to my prompt on Blue Sky. Said, hoping you can provide insight on why our defense is having trouble stopping the opponent's run game, even though it was better last week. And then this is a longer question from Daniel that I got via email that I think is related because it talks about like the defensive scheme and specifically the D-line. Hey, Craig, this is a question for the mailbag. One of the more pleasant surprises this season is the defense under Joe Witt with all the misfits he has dealt with from the past regime, i.e. Forbes, Jamin, Big Phil. Is it concerning that Duran has not had more impact this year? In spots, I have seen him cause pressure and eat up blocks to free others, but other than that, I have not heard his name in games this year. If he were consistently adding to the pass rush or is constantly in the backfield with TFLs, I wouldn't bat an eye, but is it getting to the point where I forget he is on the field? I'm not sure this is a system thing because he does not have to play more than 90% of the snaps as he did in years past. Obviously, system is a lot more than rotation, but I think the run game efficacy and Duran's performance are obviously tied. So what do we make of how Joe Witt Jr. is coached up this, and all the other coaches that are involved in that, Daryl Tapp, et cetera, are coaching up this D-line and how they're performing right now?
Yeah, I think for me, the one thing that jumps out when you're watching film is there is a little bit of a personnel thing. Like when you watch teams that are really good at stopping the run. Like I was watching getting ready for the next show. I was watching the Saints and the New York Giants, right? And the New York Giants are not necessarily the best team in the world at stopping the run, but Dexter Lawrence was out. So they had this guy, Riley, who's in playing nose for them. And then all the other dudes on the interior, like these big dudes who understand how to like sit double teams and the structure of the defense. Like they're playing a jam front, so it makes it really hard for the offensive line, specifically the three guys on the interior, to get double teams and combinations to the next level. In our nickel stuff, like where the Commanders are in a lot of 4-down stuff. And when you think about 4-down versus a 6-man blocking surface, you usually have the opportunity to get two really clean double teams on the interior. And the reason we're playing nickel is partially because we want kind of these two high coverage shells behind it. And when you get those, like you need a specific type of dude in there that's going to be able to split that double team and kind of sit a knee and be strong at the point. And Drazan's not really built that way. Drazan does flash. Like when the double team's loose, he can penetrate it and make a play. Duran's the same way, but it is challenging. It's tough. And the spacing of the front, I think you saw that versus Tennessee. Like, T'Vondre Sweat's one of the best, by PFF metric, one of the best run-stuffing defensive tackles in the NFL. Jeffrey Simmons is very disruptive. But in this game, I think you see how in the Tennessee game, you saw how difficult it was for them to be successful because of how they spaced their front. So sometimes like a defense is built for that defensive tackle to be successful and make a lot of plays. Then other times it's a little bit more challenging. And I think there's a little bit of a, robbing Peter to pay Paul scenario here in terms of like, you can't have everyone optimized all the time. You're basically looking for 80% efficiency from the entire defense. And right now, this 4-down spacing, putting a little bit more stress on those defensive tackles, to me seems like the right solution. Because again, you want to. The most important thing to me with this defense is eliminating explosive plays, and I'm actually okay if the other team runs the football a little bit, as long as they're not gashing you with like explosive runs, 10, 15-yard runs, which we haven't really had a huge issue of that this year. It's been death by 1,000 paper cuts. The good thing about that is that at some point you're going to have a neutral run. And you just got to maximize. And I think this defense has done a really good job of doing that. So that's kind of what I would say. This is something that every 4-down spacing team has to deal with. That every team does, right? And when you go around and you watch a lot of football, the 3 technique gets double teamed, the shade gets double teamed. Like all that stuff is what's happening. And you see it happening here with the Commanders. And I think that's part of the reason why they're having a hard time. And again, you can go out and you can find, a big hulking nose to kind of sit in there and eat up those double teams. But those guys, because of how college football is, are becoming harder and harder to find.
Yeah, and it's also why like Carl Davis is maybe going to be playing over Phil Mathis / was in the Tennessee game, and he played pretty well. It wasn't a ton of snaps, but like he gets out there, he shows some things. I think Sheldon Day has done a decent job of that this year at times, and like to Dan's credit and Adam's credit and Daryl Tapp's credit, like they know what they're looking for in that piece. And Dan's background as a D-line coach certainly helps. And so it doesn't have to be the flashy whatever guy. Like they know exactly what they're looking for, and they've gone and found the discount bargain bin versions of it. But maybe that is somewhere where they spend a little money or invest some more draft capital potentially moving forward to go with the quick penetrating type of Jerzon Newton. And then we'll see what they do ultimately with Daron Payne. I think part of the problem earlier in the year, and it's unfortunate for John, but like, when you have John Allen, Daron Payne, and Jerzon Newton, like all three of those guys are like that. So you constantly have the undersized, penetrating type, and that's tough. You need those guys to then do something that's not their best or their highest and best use. And so I think that was a struggle earlier in the year. I think the other thing I'll just add real quick is like, if you need a stop late in the game, can you manufacture a stop? Like think of like the end of the Baltimore game. And that's a tough example because Baltimore does this to everyone. But it also like shows you how hard it is, and especially against the best teams. But like if you're down late and you need to get a stop on, 3 stops and then use your timeouts and then see what you can do with, a minute left after you get the ball back after a punt situation, can you stop the run then? And that is, luckily they haven't been in that position a ton this year, and it's always better to just avoid that position in the first place and just like get up early. And we've seen when the Commanders can do that, then they don't have a lot of stress late in games, which has been nice and is also very rare because blowout wins don't happen at the frequency that they've happened for Washington this year.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe a better point, is this team is built in a certain way as of right now. When I was in Atlanta with Dan, like they were built to kind of play with a lead, same thing with Dallas. Like that defense is built to play with a lead, and there's value to that, right? There's value to kind of having, pass rushing upside at all spots, like Daron, Jerzon, the defensive ends are their names Fowler and all these guys, right? Luvu, those guys do a good job of being like kind of upside pass rushers. Are they the best on first and second down? No, but you've structured this defense with a vision, right? And I think that's okay, right? And I do think we also talked about this too, like how there are pieces and talent kind of missing from this equation. Big Phil was supposed to be that guy for the Ron Rivera regime, right? And so has he lived up to that billing? He's flashed at points this year, but obviously the consistency isn't there for the staff. So I do think, again, this team is good. I think they're punching above their weight class. There's a lot of things to be excited about, but I think these are the types of questions where you say, hey, can we find somebody, maybe a day 3 pick or a guy in the 3rd round that has this skill set that can complement and supplement what we see in Jerzon and what we see in Daron. And I think that's the thing in fleshing out a roster. It's not always the top guys. It's the depth and role player pieces. Like I think John Bates is a great example of this. Like John Bates is maybe the best blocking inline, Y in the NFL. And is he going to catch a ton of passes? No, but does he add value? Does he complement Ben Sinnott? Does he complement Zach Ertz in a nice way? Absolutely. And you need that guy on your roster, just like you need this. And it doesn't need to be, I think you made a great point with Sheldon Day. It doesn't need to be a big person. It just needs to be someone who understands how to stop the run from the interior defensive line spot. And it works with the edge guys too. Like Fowler, I think, has been great. I think unequivocally great, like in terms of his ability to rush the passer, his ability to find explosive plays in key moments, specifically on 3rd and short situations, but he's not going to set a great vertical edge for you. So can you find somebody again? And I think when he was brought in, like his role was exactly what it is now. He's playing more snaps. So can you find somebody, hey, like on 1st and 2nd down, that's going to like dent that edge, make this thing a little bit harder. And again, those are long-term depth personnel decisions that kind of flesh this roster out.
Right, and Cleveland Ferrell's supposed to be that guy, and he's been in and out of the lineup with some injuries this year, and kind of been surpassed on the depth chart by Fowler because he's played so well, and obviously Dorrance is a consistent guy there. So, they have some versions of that, but it's something that they'll continue to work on moving forward. Kind of last thing on this related topic. An email from Brett who said, after the Philly loss, Logan talked about how there was a noticeable talent discrepancy, especially the push from the line. How do we combat that in our next go around with him? Really, this could apply to both lines of scrimmage. This could apply for the Commanders' offensive line trying to push Jalen Carter around, and this can obviously apply for the group that we just talked about going against Jordan Mailata and company, which might be the best O-line in football, them or Detroit.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention Lane Johnson to speak how talented that group is.
I just picked one. Lane, you're awesome too.
You pick any of them, right? Lane and Dickerson, right?
Yeah, both Mailata and Lane Johnson, fantastic blockers, fantastic singers. Like they're multi-talented fellas.
Multi-talented. So I think watching the Tennessee game, because it was also something that happened in the Dallas game, right? And there was a specific type of player, specific style of player that seems to be giving them a hard time. And that's that penetrating kind of up the field three technique. I know Diggy Zua for Dallas kind of presented some similar stuff, specifically earlier in the game. And one of the things that I absolutely loved about the Tennessee game is they had a couple of answers for that type of player, which they had not shown prior to this or consistently prior to this season, right? They were like, oh, we're going to run trap. You trap penetrating three techniques. Like, look at our defense. Like, what hurts our defense? Trap and wham, right? Because our guys are penetrating vertical, one gap kind of guys. So versus Simmons, who is, again, one of the most disruptive run-stopping players in the NFL, we're going to trap him. We're going to wham him. And we're going to get big gashes off of that like teams have been gashing us. And the way they got to that, I love the setup, right? We kind of had, this kind of Bates little motion in the backfield. We're going to run duo a couple times. We're going to run receiver lead a couple times. We're going to run wham a couple times. And I think that schematic element is something that gets me excited because, hey, now Jalen Carter, you don't have to worry about. You can't just get up the field all the time because we're not always running bounce. We're not always running GT. We're not always running outside zone or whatever we're running, right? We're running something that's going to give you problems if you're not paying attention. And so I think those things are enough in a game plan to disrupt. So I love how they're already starting to think about how do we handle this penetrating three technique. And I think that's the thing is, we've talked about it on the defensive side of the ball a lot, but I think you see it on the offensive side of the ball quite a bit, is these little schematic elevations, right? Schematically, you're not going to change. You're not going to take a bad roster and make them good, but you can take a good roster and make them above average. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing here with some of these little tweaks, some of these little wrinkles. And I think you saw it last week versus Tennessee, which again makes me excited offensively for combating that Philly defense. And again, they're not going to give you a lot of different fronts. They're not going to give you a lot of different looks. They're not going to they do what they do. They play a cover two shell. They get into quarters. They get into six. They do some man coverage, but they're not going to play 8-man boxes. And that's how that team is built. So you kind of know what you're going to get. So if you can handle this one element, they're going to be in a much better spot. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I think if you get the support from the offense, on the defensive side of the ball, if you get the support from the offense that we were expecting them to get, I think you look at that defensive performance and say, man, those guys flat got after Philly for 3 quarters, flat got after them. Yeah. And if they can give a similar performance and the offense can play, what would you say, Craig? 50% better, 75% better?
I mean, at least 50. Like that, the offense was so unproductive in that game that it's just you had no shot defensively, and you knew they were just going to wear down. And especially like Philly specifically wears teams down. Like I've watched more of them and been reading more stuff with them and kind of following them a little more closely, obviously, as they've gotten good in the back half of the season. And this week against Carolina is the first week in forever that they haven't had a Saquon 50-yard run at some point during the game. Like, not literally, but like some huge chunk play, like 30-plus yards, where especially in the second half, just that bit, Lane Johnson, Landon Dickerson, all those guys that we talked about, Jordan Mailata, on down the list, like Mekhi Becton, like it's a big freaking dude. And they just lean on you, and they run the ball consistently, and Jalen's a threat in the run game. And eventually you just get tired, like physically tired, and you make either you just don't have the push or you make a mental mistake, and there goes Saquon for 60. And Carolina somehow survived that, in part because they were able to convert some first downs and like move the ball just enough, and they have a shot at the end if Leggett catches that ball. So I think, if you can just get even 50% better, nevertheless 75, to where you're converting some first downs, it's not as many 3-and-outs, you've got a chance to hold up late in a way that you didn't have really a chance, even though you held the lead in the fourth quarter of the first game.
Yeah, 1,000%. So I think when you think about it as a complementary football type scenario, I think you feel pretty good about – I feel really good about the second matchup. If Kliff can continue to find ways to get – and talk about maybe the worst team, the worst defense – to have on a short week, it's got to be Philly, right? Because, again, they kind of do what they do. Vic Fangio does a great job of kind of pulling from his Rolodex and saying, these are the defensive coverages we want to be excellent at. And they do a great job, And so if you can find a way to increase your rushing efficiency on first down, which we just talked about how schematically they've already shown an ability to do that.
Also, B-Rob missed that game, didn't he?
Yeah, he missed that game. All right, no, he played that game, but only had like 10 snaps or something like that. He played the first quarter. Remember that? Remember he had a nice run in the first little bit there?
Oh, yeah. So, like, that. I mean, how different is this offense with B-Rob? Like, that could be your 50% right there. It's just having him the whole game.
Yeah, and so I think those types of, again, that little schematic elevation, finding a way, again, I feel very confident that Jaden, after seeing the defense, having a whole week of prep, well, again, there's even if that's 25%, but I think that'll give you 50 right there. Having B-Rob kind of more consistently locked in with more efficient kind of third down execution in the game, like, even though the roster, again, compared to Philly, and most rosters compared to Philly are quote-unquote under-talented, but this is where the kind of composition of the team, the coaching, the scheme is the stuff that kind of levels the playing field. And, quite frankly, offensively, Philly, say what you want about the offensive line, the running game. I mean, they threw the ball for 108 yards or something.
Yeah,
last
you
game.
add in the sacks, it was like 80. But yeah, Jalen finished with 108 yards passing. He was awful.
And that's been the last 2 weeks. And again, that's something you've seen from him even in our game, right? Not super efficient throwing the football. And so if the game flow flips, which they haven't had to deal with because their defense is playing so well, let's say they're down by 10, right? What does that look like for Jalen Hurts? And I don't have a good answer. I would imagine not great because again, they're not built to do that consistently.
But that's fine for them most of the time because they're really good and they're not finding themselves down. The other two things for the rematch is I would hope that Kliff moves Terry around a little bit, gets him away from Kenyon Mitchell, which obviously he's shown that he was going to do that in the Tennessee game, and just a little bit goes a long way. And then Marshawn Lattimore, the man-to-man stuff on the outside, to just be able to play that and trust, like, hey, Lattimore's got A.J. Brown. Like, we're good there, and see what that kind of effect that has. All right, let's get into some roster questions, Logan. X on Blue Sky says, which players on expiring deals would you try to extend today for at least next year to take some of the cap hit now? Wagner, Chin, someone else. I don't think that's actually how that works from the monetary standpoint. Like, your cap is pretty locked in. And like next year's cap, if you sign someone to an extension, like, it's going to affect next year's cap, that money. The good news is they have the money. So it's not really like the math. Don't worry about the math. Let's focus on the football side of this question.
Because we don't know that much about math, really.
Famously horrendous. For those that are listening, not watching, I pointed at myself. Logan can evaluate his own math skills. Yeah,
my own math skills they're solid when I got pen and paper, but outside of that, like mental math, not my deal.
Yeah, so. They have $100 million in cap space. They're fine. That's the math. But in terms of which football players would you want to have back, I think that's an interesting thing. And like, would you try to do anything now? I mean, obviously at this point now, probably not. You're in December, but like maybe during the bye week, I would have considered some discussions, and maybe there were some discussions and stuff will get done right after the season. But Chin and Wagner are two big names. Ertz, obviously, another one that is interesting. And there's a couple other guys down the list, but I think the Chin is where I would, or Jeremy Chin is where I would go. I think he has played at a really high level. I think he has played with the place, like embodied is the word I would use, the play style and the physicality of what Dan Quinn wants, as well as anyone not named Frankie Louvu. Like, he has just hit the crap out of people. Super physical. It communicates great. Like, it's not perfect. It's not like he's the best, safety in football or anything like that. And there are times in some coverages that he's dropped some things or whatever. But by and large, he's played really, really well. And I think the continuity of him and Quan moving forward together is worth it. I don't think any of the young guys like Percy Butler necessarily hasn't stepped up and been like, oh, I should actually be starting. And so with that, sure, we could look at the free agent list, but like, Jeremy's still pretty young too. Like, he's in his mid-20s. Why would you, like, what else are you looking for? And so he's the guy for me that I think I would move forward with. I think Bobby Wagner, I would also say, like, that dude can play here as long as he wants. Like, he is what he means to the team, his leadership. He's still playing at a fairly high level. And that position is also really, really hard to fit and find guys who can't, like, unless you can go find Fred Warner, like Bobby Wagner's a pretty high level dude relative to the others of the position. So I think those two are the ones that I would be looking at. And if Bobby wants to stay around and continue to have that leadership role, I'm signing him for another year as well.
Yeah, no, I think this is what I would say. If you put your GM cap on, right, you say probably Chin, Wagner, and Ertz, you probably all offer extensions. Now, what type of extension is different for all three of those guys, right? So for me, I think you bring up a great point. Chin is probably someone you say, hey, can we build long-term around? And it seems like based on his play style that, yeah, long-term we could potentially build around him. So could we give him a 3-year deal in kind of that $20 million range? That seems very reasonable to me. Warner's a little bit older, so like, what do you do there? Or Wagner, excuse me, I said Warner. Yeah, a little bit older, right? So do you say, hey, we want 2-year deal, 1-year deal? Ertz, same thing. And then I think the dollar amount associated with that, because I think Ertz is interesting because he's done everything that I think you want and needed him to do this year. But does his presence on the roster hurt Ben Sinnott's development or something like that? So again, you probably offer him something and say, hey, this is what we're thinking about for next year. We want you to kind of maybe, and again, this is totally hypothetical. I have no idea. And this same conversation would be having with Wagner in terms of like McGee and his development as well. But you want to come back for kind of a 1-year, $4 million deal, and then we'll kind of work through a different kind of roster situation where Ben Sinnott's getting more reps or whatever, hypothetical. So I do think all three of them get some type of offer, right? It just depends to me on whether the offer is saying, hey, we want you here long-term or here for, a year as another kind of stopgap until we can find something better or until we can work out a more competitive situation in the room. Like, because again, and I'm not comparing myself to Zach Ertz because he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He's one of the best tight ends over the last 20 years for sure. But like there were times in my career, especially late, where it's like, hey, we want you here, right? But you're going to be in a competition with this player. And so the deal that I got would reflect that. It would be, a $2 million deal, but only a little bit of it would be guaranteed. And it'd be like, if you get cut, we're going to save the back half of this contract. Then again, I'm not saying I'm Zach Ertz, but I do think there are contract situations where teams like what you're doing, they want you back. All those things are true, but it's in the context of we want you to compete for a spot next year, and that's a different type of extension than I think the caller or the messenger indicated there.
Yeah, I think I would give Chin like a 3-year deal. I'd probably do 1+1 for Wagner, and then I guess 1 like in that kind of deal for Ertz. But I think because Sinnott was a 2nd-round pick and like that's your guy, I think you kind of got to start going down that path. That's just the reality of the NFL and how it all works. I'd rather invest somewhere else. And, if you get another veteran tight end who's more of like a blocker or whatever, like more of a true, like more of a Logan Paulson type, a guy who's like, yep, I'm going to be the third guy in the room. I'm going to play on teams because that's the other element of it too. Like how does that affect your depth? I think is Jordan McGee the middle linebacker of the future? I'd hope so. That'd be a heck of a pick. But because he hasn't played it basically at all this year,
right?
If they want to bring Bobby back for one more, I think that's fine. And then, as I said, Chin's the guy that I'd just be like, yep, we're good. We found our guy. Next 3 years, you and Colin Martin are our starting safeties. Fantastic. Let's move forward. All right. That leaves the rest of the roster. And we got an interesting kind of thought exercise. Let me see if I can find the actual question real quick. And it was from... I don't know. I can't find it. We got an email. This is your email? Good job. I'm sorry you're not getting credit on the show. But it's basically like, how would you divide the cap space on a pie chart for next season? And Logan, you can make as many slices of pie if you want. If you want to go positionally, if you just want to go offense, defense, if you want to tangentially answer the question and just say like, I would really invest here. I'm good with all of that. But I think for me, when I think about the roster for next year, there's like a couple of key spots that you definitely want to improve. I think you have to spend some money in your wide receiver room or spend some capital, I should say, in your wide receiver room. That might not actually wind up being, big big free agent money. We also got a couple. This will shock you. We got a couple T. Higgins questions. Whether you go and sign T. Higgins or sign another big time wide receiver, I don't think it's the worst possible use of space, because I think you see some of the best offenses have these weapons and multiple guys, and what it does, what they all do for each other. And because you're on a rookie quarterback contract, you can afford to be what would otherwise be reckless at a couple positions, as long as the money it kind of expires by the time that Jaden is due his big contract. And we got another question that I think folds into this too, which is basically like, did Ron accidentally set up the Commanders really well because there's just not anybody else that's an up and coming guy that you're going to have to pay big money to because they missed on so many draft picks? And it's like, yes. And that's actually the NFL system of competitive balance working, right? Like the system is designed for everyone to go 8-8 or 9-8 or 8-9 now, because they put a silly 17th game on and you can't actually go 500 anymore. And so if you don't have good players, you should have cap space because you're not paying them. And if you're bad, your draft picks are higher. Like that's the competitive balance things at work. And so as they're going to have all this money, ultimately, how do they spend it? So we'll combine all those questions into one, Logan, and kind of bat that around here for a few minutes.
Yeah. So I don't know. Obviously, the receiver thing's a big deal, in terms of elevating and kind of saying the easiest way to raise the floor of an offense and the easiest way to insulate, a rookie quarterback is getting a receiver, right? That can be there for him and kind of, again, create more of those favorable matchups in terms of man-to-man situations, a guy that can just straight out win. And again, I think Noah Brown's done an excellent job of that, but I think there's always spots and situations you can upgrade it. And I think that would be an easy one to kind of look at. Another one is offensive line in terms of spending capital. And again, I think this group has played really, really well this year. They've definitely they've been out in front of their skis. They've done a really nice job. But I always think you are looking for more talent, right? And I think those are two kind of easy offensive solutions, right? And you say, hey, is there anybody in the draft or is there anybody in free agency that we can kind of target? And again, it doesn't need to be the high price free agent necessarily, but I think we've talked about this before. Adam's done a really nice job of saying, like, what's the best fit for this organization? And you can't always find, left tackles in free agency, but you can find, maybe an upgrade at guard. And again, that's not an indictment of anybody on this roster, but I look at what Carolina did, last year, and they went out and they signed two of the top free agent guards. And you look at how effective that offensive line is, specifically the interior's been, and how that's elevated Bryce Young's play in the second half of the year, how that's helped them run the football, like just by getting more talented, and that's bigger, stronger, faster. And that's what you're always hunting for. And I think that's something I would kind of keep an eye on. And then defensively, they bring in Marshawn Lattimore. And this is something that I think is fans always get caught up in. We get caught up in when we're doing our draft eval stuff is you say, oh, well, they've made these moves, right? They've brought in a corner, they've whatever. But in the draft, if there's a guy that you like, if there's a free agent that you like, you always, always, always never turn down talent, especially when you're in kind of year two of a rebuild. So I think that's another important thing to kind of keep in mind. But for the defense, I'm looking at defensive linemen, right? Is there an elite edge rusher? Is there, kind of that depth rotational run stuffing player, or however they want to characterize that elevates this group, right? Is there another depth piece at linebacker? Is there another depth piece at safety? Like all those things are things that I'm definitely kicking the tires on. And I know Adam's kicking the tires on. I think it's just important to remember when you're building a team, you're always hunting for talent and fit. And if there are guys that are talented that are going to make you better, don't get attached to the person that's here as a fan, right? Because of what they've done for you in the past. Like, is there an opportunity to upgrade? I think is the bigger question.
Which is kind of a funny thing when like people are still like, I don't know. Like, I really think they gave up too early on Forbes. And I'm like, what have you seen from Emmanuel Forbes? Yeah. And like people get attached because it's a draft pick. And like, I'm not gonna. You're all adults. I'm not gonna tell you what to do with your feelings. But like, I don't get it. That's for sure. As for looking at the free agent, like the contour of the free agent market, there's a ton of receivers available. And now we know that they're going to go after the person first, right? They're going to try to find that elite competitor. And, Stephon Diggs is available, for instance, 31 coming off an ACL, and he's been kind of sent away from multiple teams. Don't think that's your guy. T. Higgins, 25 years old, monster.
He's only 25 years old.
He'll be 26. He's 25.8 on Spotrac. So he's going to be 26. I would 100% make a run at T. Higgins. Like he's the big-bodied receiver that they don't have. And he's really competitive. And as long as you feel good about his injury status, because he has been banged up at times, like I would consider spending money on T. Higgins if I can get him on like a 3-year deal. Like it's going to be reported as a 4 or whatever, but like as long as the big money is done after 3, like I would consider going after T. Higgins. Keenan Allen, Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, who's going to be 29, but like could you get him on a couple-year deal for some larger money? He's interesting to me. So there's definitely a bunch of guys that are available in the receiver market. And then the pass rushing market, you have DeMarcus Lawrence, who's obviously on the downside of his career, but has tremendous familiarity with Dan. What's his face from the Jets? Hassan Reddick, who's kind of with the Jets. Like,
yeah, I wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah. If you want some pass rush juice, though, he's going to be available. And so like that's the kind of stuff that I would be looking at is like, who are the guy, like, can you get like the veteran pass rush type? Cause also there'll be guys that get cut, right? That aren't going to show up on the free agent list right now, but, they're going to be cap casualties. And like Danielle Hunter last year leaves Minnesota, goes down to Houston, and he's having a huge year, down there. Actually, no, the other way around. I don't know. Wherever he is, he's having a huge year. And so I think that those types of guys too, like proven production of like that guy is going to get a ton of catches. That guy's going to get after the passer. That guy's going to be a run stuffer. Like if you know, I'm paying for some certainty again because they don't have to pay a bunch of guys on their incumbent roster, and their quarterback is going to be a absolute steal for 4 years. So I think that's kind of how I would think of it, is like being willing to take some, I don't want to say risk, but like being able to take some liberties with that quarterback contract that you otherwise typically wouldn't make. And often it's like, oh, I wouldn't pay for that position. I would.
Yeah. And I think that's something that I'm really excited for, is because assuming that Jaden Daniels is your guy, which it feels like every indication is that that's the guy, then take advantage of the contract, right? Start building around him. But I do think like understand where the roster's at. Like I feel like this is where fans and I think GMs get a little bit, like rose-colored goggles on, is like, look at Houston last year. They were like, we got our guy. Let's go. Let's make this thing happen. And there were some kind of fundamental issues with the offensive line that needed some tweaking, some work. They bring in Diggs, who again, like, is he an ad there? Does he hurt them? Like, how's that go? Right. So I would just say, like, even though there's this kind of knee-jerk reaction, like, let's go spend money, let's get the best people on the market, blah, 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 blah. Like, I also think that one of the things that I respect and that I appreciated about Adam Peters' process this offseason was these are the right people for this culture. And it's going to be, this is going to really show you what kind of guy he is, because it's going to be so incredibly tempting to go out and be like, you know who I want? I want I want T. Higgins. I want whoever. But maybe I'm really glad you brought up Godwin as an example, because Godwin's coming off another injury, right? But he has this really nice route running, nuance, contested catchability that I really think would be a excellent fit here as the number 2 in Washington. I really think that would be a nice fit. And if financially that's a little bit better, if I've heard he's from multiple guys that I know that have trained with him, that know him personally, he's an excellent human being. So maybe that's the fit. And I know that's not as exciting as T. Higgins, but maybe that's the right opportunity. And again, the draft is something, again, can you hit that the way they hit that this year, in terms of saying, these are Commanders football players, these are cornerstones we can build around, and just infuse this roster with more talent and more competition. I think that's the other thing, is getting the right person, is understanding, like, we're breeding a certain type of culture here. We want guys that are compete and get after it and get better every single day. And that kind of goes back to, like, are we getting the right person, in addition to the financial element, which I think is so often, and financial and name element. And what I find, it's so funny when I go to parties and fans say, oh, what do you think of player X? And, I haven't done it yet, but usually in the free agent period or the draft time, I've watched a lot of film on a lot of receivers or a lot of corners or a lot of whatever. And I'll say, oh, I really think this guy's a better fit. And a fan will be like, well, what about this name? Remember, the name is not, it's a name because the national media has made it a narrative, right? Like, let's trust Adam Peters. Let's trust the process. And I think, again, like you and I both, we have a lot of faith in him. We had a lot of faith in his process. And I really am excited to watch him kind of execute this thing. And again, like, he's got the company credit card, but like that doesn't mean you go out and buy whatever you want. It means you make smart financial investments for the future.
Right. And two things. One, there's going to be guys that want to come here, which is so different than in the past. Guys want to play with Jaden. Guys want to play for DQ. They want to be a part of this. So you'll have more options, and you're not going to have to pay a premium like you would kind of pay that tax in the past. And two, Adam Peters is not afraid to go trade for a name or acquire a name. Like, if it's the right fit, he did take part in that Christian McCaffrey trade. Like, that's one of the biggest trades of the last decade. And so if the guy is right, or Trent Williams, if it's the right guy, he'll do it. It's not like he's anti-name. It's just, it's got to be the right guy. It can't just be because of the name. Take Command Podcast, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here. And don't forget, Logan, I don't know if yours has arrived at the house yet, but we have our Take Command merch available now at the Breaking Tea, or at the 106.7 The Fan store at Breaking Tea. Ta-da!
Oh, that looks nice, man. Looks good.
Yeah. So you got this T-shirt that I'm holding up for those that are watching on YouTube. You also have the hoodies, so you can check that out. And again, I think we're still taking surveys in at hoffmanshow.com/survey. Get a nice little discount on the merch, and we love to hear your feedback on the show. All right, last but not least on this Take Command mailbag, Kliff Kingsbury is going to be someone that gets invited to interview for head coaching positions. That is for sure. Whether he's interested, all that kind of stuff, TBD. Whether he's actually offered a job, obviously TBD. But how? We'll ask it this way, because this is the way it was asked in the question, and I'll see if I can find the question real quick and shout out the person who did. But how important is it to keep Kliff this year? This offseason for Dan Quinn and company moving forward?
That's a really good question. And I like how you worded that. Like, how important is it? Like, obviously, you want to keep your offensive coordinator on staff. Obviously, you want to keep a guy who understands quarterback development and has insulated Jaden Daniels and appears to have a good relationship with him. Obviously, all of those things are important. And so is it the most important thing? I'm not sure. I think the other thing that I'd look at here too is you got to give Dan Quinn a lot of credit. He's done a great job assembling the staff and getting guys together, getting them on the same page. And I think getting guys who have aspirations of bigger and better things. And one of the things, like when you compare this or juxtapose this staff with the Ron Rivera staff is, I remember there were conversations we were having where it's like, well, who would be the OC if you were to move on from Scott Turner? And there weren't a lot of like definitive answers or very clear answers. And I look at here and you've got Anthony Lynn. He's been a coordinator. He's been a head coach. He's got, I'm sure, aspirations to move up the ladder again. Brian Johnson, the quarterback coach, again, was a coordinator, has got a lot of experience with some different offenses. I think that would be a nice kind of natural fit. Tavita, you've mentioned him before, kind of long term. So I think we've mentioned this before on the show, but I do think that having those guys in place make Kliff's departure sting a little bit less. If he does leave, obviously it's going to be a big deal, right? Because again, he's the architect, and we talked about that on our last show with the guy from The Athletic. His name escapes me. Dane. Robert. Dane. Where'd that come from?
Dane's their draft guy. So you had an Athletic. Logan and I are both battling the brain fog, and it seems that some of the names and things, words are
tough to come by these days. So and I think he said like the architect of the offense, and when you look at the offense, his architecture's been outstanding, like understanding what Jaden can handle, understanding kind of the play calls, getting the offense kind of clicking and flowing. Like if that were to leave, that would be tough to overcome. But obviously, like we just talked about, there are contingencies. So is it going to sting? Yes. Is it going to sting as bad as it potentially could? Probably not, because I do think there are people here that have that kind of aspiration, that talent, that motivation, that are gonna kind of offset some of that if he does leave.
Yeah, no, I think that's correct. And it was Peter who actually messaged you on Instagram who asked this. So thanks, Peter, for the question. You worded that very well, how important. And Peter also added, like, would you pay him extra money, a la like what Houston did with Bobby Slowick last year? Yeah, I
probably would.
And if you're Kliff's agent, you're basically committing malpractice if you don't just go like, hey, guys, if we just throw us a little bit of extra cash and like we'll be good. But here's the other thing with Kliff that I mentioned all the time. He's getting paid by the Arizona Cardinals already until like 2027. So
That's crazy.
Yeah. He signed an extension and got fired 1 year later. So he has head coach money coming in right now. He is going to be especially picky about his head coaching jobs because he's enjoying what he's doing. He's making head coach money from the Cardinals. And he, I think, understands seeing what is going on here, the importance, like how much he's learned from Dan, how much he's learned from Dan and Adam's relationship, how much he's probably learned about what Josh Harris is doing. Like he's learned how important the organization is. And if he's going to do the head coach thing again, there's no way he's going to do it. Like he's not going to, I'm trying to think of some of the wackier ones. Like he's not going to Dallas. No way he's going to Dallas.
Well, I mean, I've heard that. So again, this is where picking a location is interesting because he is from Texas, right? And so like, is that like his, and I don't know this is totally hypothetical, like.
Did he grow up in Texas and the Dallas Cowboys is head coach of the Dallas Cowboys?
That's his dream job. And despite all of the dysfunction, all the craziness there, would you still take that job? If that's your dream job, maybe you would. But to your point, he is going to be, I think, much more selective. And I've talked to a couple people who know him. And I think one of the things that it sounds like from these, again, like, the phone tag game from Kliff, where it's like, it sounds like he appreciates not having to be a head coach and just focus on the offense.
I don't know that he wants, like, I think he wants to be, he's competitive as hell. Like, he's going to want to be a head coach again. I don't know that he wants to be a head coach again right now. Like, I think part of being a competitor sometimes is being patient enough to know when it's time to go. And I don't think for him it's going to be time to go this year. Maybe,
have I ever told you my Kyle Shanahan story about that?
No.
I remember we were talking, and this was after the offense had been really good. I want to say it was like 2012. And Kyle's getting all these head coaching calls and opportunities. And I was like, hey, man, are you going to take that? Because again, like in my mind, it's like those opportunities don't come around every day. You got to jump on it while the iron's hot. And he goes, I'm not going to because I'm not ready right now. And I need a little bit more experience. And, obviously he goes to Cleveland afterwards and then goes down to Atlanta and really kind of takes like, I don't want to say like 5 years to kind of figure it out and kind of find that opportunity. It wasn't that long, 3 years, 4 years. But I do think there is something to that, like knowing when you're ready for that opportunity, when you've got kind of the infrastructure. Because again, that's the other thing about head coach. And I think Dan's a great example of this is who's going to be on your staff? Who's going to be your OC? Who's going to kind of offset some of the difficulties of being a head coach? And I think one of the things about Kyle in San Francisco in 2017 when I was there is he was aware of all of those pitfalls, right? And the staff, the offensive staff specifically, was built and constructed to accommodate that. And I think like that's something that, again, like just because he's going to get an offer doesn't mean he, A, wants it, B, he thinks he's ready for it, or C, it's the right fit for him. And I do think you bring up a great point with Dan Quinn. And like when you talk to Kyle Shanahan and when you talk to Sean McVay, it's not, oh, I got a head coaching job. It's like, who's the owner? Who's the GM? Where's the roster at? Who's the quarterback?
Jets are a better example than the Cowboys even.
Yes.
Kliff's not going to the freaking Jets.
Yeah.
Like they're a dumpster fire that just douses itself in kerosene all the time. Like he's not going to the Jets.
Right.
Don't do that, Kliff.
Right.
There's no amount
and even like Chicago's interesting to me because again, like he has a relationship with Caleb Williams, right? And you say, oh, if you think Caleb Williams is the guy, maybe that's a good fit. But obviously the way that team has managed head coaches and GMs the last, 15 years, whatever that's been, it's not great. And so you want, and I think another one is Carolina. Like I know that job's not going to open up, but like those are really good examples where ownership's a little bit funky. And it's like, do I want to, again, how many shots do you get to be a head coach? Not many. So like it reminds me of basketball, like be selective with your shot selection, right? Be selective with that. Be selective with your head coach opportunities because you're going to get one, maybe two more. And if this goes bad, maybe no more. So for me, I would say like be selective with those opportunities. And I think he's going to be. And so that's the great thing about his current situation. Like you already alluded to, he's getting paid by Arizona. He's getting paid by the Commanders. Maybe you give him more money. He does not have to do anything drastic here. He can be very deliberate and very specific about the opportunity. And it sounds based on what you've said, and I feel the same way, that he's going to do that. He's going to be really deliberate and selective about the opportunity. And it might happen this year, but it also might not. I think he'd be okay with that.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is Kliff has talked about in some of his post game or some of his media avails, like he's poured into the relationships more this year in a more meaningful and substantive way. Things in the past were a little more surface level, and he was afraid of like some of the conflict and whatever. And like now he's just like willing to have discussions, and like the relationships are much stronger here. And I do think that that's going to make it hard. Like he can be the guy that helps lead Jaden Daniels to an MVP or to Super Bowls, or like that's pretty big time. And so that opportunity is going to make it harder to walk away. Again, if he gets offered $12 million a year to go be the head coach somewhere, like, why wouldn't you go take that? That's a ton of money. It's the top of the profession, like all that kind of stuff. I'm not saying he's 100% not going to, but like if your life's pretty good, and like Kliff has also made a bunch of money. He made a bunch of money at Texas Tech. He made a bunch of money with Arizona, and the money's still coming in. Like I'm sure he's pretty well compensated now. Like how much more money do you need? Like once you have that level of money, like how much money do you actually need? And if you're happy, and that's a feeling you haven't had, at some point you just go be like, I value my happiness over an extra whatever $1 million. And that's like, sounds crazy to most of us. Like I value my happiness a lot. I could probably take a little bit of short term. $1 million. I would probably take
be unhappy,
right?
Yeah.
Like for a short term, like we could figure it. Look, Woody Johnson, I hate your football team. If you want me to coach the Jets for an NFL head coaching salary, I'll figure it out. I'll make it work until you fire me. I'll take your money. Go ahead. I'll be miserable.
Dude, how wild would that be? How absolutely insane would that be if you got a call? Like, you don't know him. You don't know anybody. You're not even interviewing. He just called you and was like, hey, man, love the pod. Let's get you out here. Let's get you out here for an interview.
Sure. You want to pay me $10 million a year? I'll be the head coach of the New York Jets. I'll do the stupid interviews with the New York media who just wants to bite my head off, and especially want to bite my head off because I'm actually one of them.
Could you imagine? Oh my God, I love this. I love the visual.
It sounds like a movie script. Actually, how do we get this in production? Yeah, owner likes podcasts. It's a little too on the nose for 2024. Anyway, that's our last mailbag of 2024 because we got games the rest of the year. So we'll be back to preview the Saints later on in the week. That'll be in your feeds on Thursday morning. And then obviously we will be back post-game on Sunday. TBD on the time on that and who our guest co-host will be because Logan will be on the road. But we'll try to have that answer for you later in the week. So stay tuned to the social medias, etc. And we will make sure we get all of that information to you so you can join us live. But by Sunday night, it'll be in your podcast feed anyway, so you can always check it out there. All right. Thanks for all your questions. Really appreciate it. For Logan, I'm Craig, and we'll see you next time on Take Command.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.